So first of all, for those of you that are on the call that I may not know, my name's Deborah Murphy and I'm the CEO of RDA, or Regional Development Australia, in the Illawarra. I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which I meet you from, which is the Dharawal country, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. We also do a mental health acknowledgement, which we started in COVID, but now it's applicable to wars, floods, and that mental health acknowledgement is to show respects to people in the group who have a lived experience, and to let them know that their voice is valued and important to our community and the world we live in, and that may be especially pertinent when we get to the Q&A session. I'd like to acknowledge MPs on the call. So I see we've got Paul Scully here, the MP member for Wollongong, Tanya Brown, who is the not an MP, but she is the Deputy Lord Mayor of Wollongong City Council, and also acknowledge board members of RDA Illawarra, Paul Wellings and Nikki Sloan, who are on the call. So welcome to the webinar today, which is we're calling Population, Housing and Jobs webinar. As I said, we're going to do a very short, sharp, as we do in these webinars, presentation. Then we'll do so about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll do around 15 minutes of Q&A. During that time, we just ask that you leave yourself on mute, please, and that you hold all questions till the end. And that includes, please, no chat. It is way too hard to monitor on a larger group. So to start with, I would like to introduce my colleague, Alex Spillett. Alex is a policy manager from RDA Illawarra and our own in-house data nerd. So I'll hand over to the expert in the room, and that's Alex.
Always reminded, Deborah, thank you for that welcome, that an expert is a drip under pressure. So for context, everybody, the population data that's presented here is from the ABS Regional Population Growth Data Set. It's published at the end of March, and the data is current up to the 30th of June for the previous year. So this goes up to the 30th of June 2021. It's the latest available data, despite the lag in publication. The other data for employment, housing prices and rents is more current, being either to the end of February or the end of last calendar year. Population data, it can be said, represents the full impact of closed borders for the 12 months that was reported. All this data is publicly available, and all the sources are cited on the slides if you want to have a look for yourselves. So I guess the good news is that despite the closed international borders, the population of the Illawarra grew by nearly 3,000 people in the 12 months to the 30th of June, with increases in each of the local government areas, Kiama, Shell Harbour and Wollongong. However, it's fair to say that the rate of increase has certainly been slowed by a lack of overseas migrants caused by the closure of the borders. So to answer the first question that's on everybody's mind, natural increase has made a higher contribution in the reporting period, with each local government area recording a natural increase in population. But is that due to more births or fewer deaths? The next slide gives that a little more detail. So it seems that couples did get to know each other a little better during extended lockdowns, with the birth rate at its highest level for the past 5 years. The number of deaths has remained relatively flat over the same period. The impact of this, which will be borne out by the forecast future population data due out a little later this year, is that people are living longer and hopefully healthier lives. And the number of younger people is increasing. RDA Illawarra is examining the impact of both those demographic shifts, and it'll be the subject of a future webinar. The population growth in the Illawarra has certainly been significantly affected by border closures, and especially in Wollongong. We are heavily reliant on overseas migration for population growth, which also fuels our region's economic growth. International border closures have seen a number of overseas migrants fall from over 2,000 a year to a net loss last year of over 250 Wollongong. So the impact of that is quite considerable, as you can imagine, both in terms of filling jobs and growing the region's economy. The majority of those overseas migrants are younger people who are either planning to have families or have families with them. So it is an impact. You can see from this chart that how much we actually rely on overseas migration as a proportion of our total annual migration figures. Historically, that reliance for the Wollongong LGA has been over 90%. And we've seen, as you saw on the last chart, a net exodus in the latest annual figures. So from that perspective, it's quite stark. Let's move on and talk a little bit about the employment numbers, which is a good story that presents another challenge. During COVID, RDA Illawarra reported regularly on the impact of COVID-related lockdowns and restrictions on employment levels. Unemployment rates peaked at over 14% as thousands of workers were laid off or had to cease work to care for school children at home, an issue that disproportionately affected women. Since the end of lockdowns and the easing of restrictions, unemployment has fallen rapidly to the 2.6 recorded in February, and female unemployment is now half that of male. So there's been a significant rebound getting women back in the workforce, and also in getting our unemployment level to quite historically low levels. Participation rate, so those in work who are those in work or actively seeking and ready to work, is not at historical highs. The high point of that chart, the red line over the last 2 years, is around about 67, rather than the 63.6 that was reported in February. But it's ticked up at the end of 2021 and is slowly increasing. So we see that there are more people looking for work from the end of last financial year, as well as a record number of people actually in work in the Illawarra. So we're getting to the situation now where we really are in a position of having more jobs than we have people to fill them, which is an unusual position for the Illawarra, but one that also presents some considerable challenges for us. At this stage, there is usually a question about youth unemployment, so I'll preempt it by saying the youth unemployment rate is also at historically low levels of 4.2%. When Deborah and I were talking about this a couple of days ago, we said youth unemployment levels, we're used to talking about levels in the high teens and low 20s. So to have a level of 4.2% is historically quite good. Let's go on to talk a little about internal migration. So residents who are relocating between regions, in this case local government areas. This has seen a significant increase in the Illawarra in the latest reporting period. In fact, there's been a movement of 1,100 people since the last financial year. And we now see that in the 12 months to June 30th, 2021, we had a net increase of 1,853 people into the Illawarra region, the majority of those in Wollongong and Shell Harbour. So overall, are we getting more people moving into the region? Yes, we are. Historically, it's increased. But the issue that we face is, whilst Sydney's seen a net loss of over 5,000 people to other regions, as a proportion of the population, the Hunter and the far south coast are getting a bigger proportion of those internal migrants than the Illawarra and the Central Coast. You can see here that the numbers are the actual numbers of internal migrants, and the percentages are the percentage of the overall population. So Sydney down, Central Coast slightly up 0.2%, Illawarra up 0.6%, far south coast up 1.4%, and the Hunter 1.1%. So from that perspective, it seems that maybe we're missing out. That sea change or tree change is quite marked people moving from the west and Sydney into coastal and more central regions during that 12-month period for whatever reasons. But there's definitely been a shift in population. So one of the other things that we said we'd look at is property prices. And we put together this slide based on some CoreLogic data, looking at the median house and unit prices for the 12 months to March 2022. And there's a little bit of color coding in here. So it starts off with the green band of house prices 0 to 250K and works through to the red band, which is the Greater Sydney area with over $1 million. And as you can see, there's a band on the coast, which is 500 to 700,000, which includes the northern rivers, mid-north, Hunter, southern inland, and the far south coast. And then we have the Illawarra and the central coast. So in that perspective, the Illawarra has the second most expensive set of property outside Greater Sydney, which I'm sure doesn't come as a surprise to people who are either paying a mortgage or looking to buy a home. But it would seem that people who can work flexibly and people who are looking to buy homes are maybe overlooking the central coast and the Illawarra in favour of the Hunter and the far south coast, which includes Shoalhaven, as places to purchase properties. So it's potential for us to price ourselves out of the affordable housing market. So for people who can't afford to buy, well, why not rent? The affordability of the Illawarra and Central Coast is not improved if one chooses to rent, unfortunately. The Illawarra is now more expensive to rent in than Sydney. So the data here are median rents, all dwelling types, all sizes in the regions denoted, and with the 12-month rental increase as a percentage. I guess on a positive note, the increase in Illawarra rents over the past year was the lowest on the New South Wales coast outside Sydney. So whilst rents are high, they're perhaps not as increasing as much as they are in other areas. But the lack of stock, the high utilisation rate of rental places is certainly driving up rental pricing and reducing the affordability quite considerably. So the potential impact for the Illawarra. The loss of overseas migrants has seen our population growth slow, but it's not halted. Natural increases and certainly internal migration are at higher levels than have been in previous years. But there's the question about whether we are getting the proportion of internal migration that we would like, even though it has increased. More skilled migrants are going to be required to meet regional needs, not just our region, but for other regions as well, and for skills and population growth. The Illawarra region is heading for full employment, at which time we will need even more skilled migrants, either internal migrants or overseas migrants. Despite an increase in internal migration to the region, the Illawarra is receiving fewer new residents than the Hunter and far south coast. And potentially that's due to higher property prices, higher rents, lack of suitable employment opportunities, or simply lifestyle choice, though I can't understand why anybody else would want to live anywhere else than the Illawarra. The Illawarra needs more workers, and that's across the board in terms of not only essential services, but professionals, people with skills. The question is, where are they going to live affordably? And is that going to be something that puts people off relocating to our region? More broadly, the continued regionalisation in New South Wales is going to require expenditure on infrastructure and services, such as healthcare, recreation, aged care, outside of metropolitan areas, if this shift is sustained. And in terms of training, there's an immediate opportunity for accelerated training of workers in several industry sectors, not least construction and healthcare. So the picture is that whilst our population is growing, we're going to face some significant challenges in terms of housing affordability and access to services over the coming years. And that is all.